Vauxhall Insignia Grand Sport Review. 8. Introduction. It's impossible to consider the arrival of the all-new Insignia without briefly reflecting on the tribulations of Vauxhall and its parent, Opel. The latest model is, after all, a significant cog in a global machine, designed and developed in Europe yet also sold in North America and China as the Buick Regal. Consequently, its life cycle is likely to be defined by the upheaval of a brand in flux, as new owner PSA Group asserts control over its unwieldy acquisition from General Motors and eventually gets around to segregating asset from redundancy. In that light, it's quite possible to view the Insignia as a considerable virtue of the procurement. Imperfect though the outgoing version was, it finished a stronger prospect than it started in the UK and proved a considerable success even when faced with the oft-mentioned squeeze of this class, the D segment, from all sides. Certainly, it overshadowed the comparatively puny impact made by PSA's own contenders and counted only the likes of the Ford Mondeo and Volkswagen Passat as direct rivals in terms of size and prominence. Both of those admittedly much newer models made the outgoing Insignia look every bit as old as nearly 10 years on sale suggested it was, though. Updates kept the car's nose above water, but it was still too heavy, too flaccid to drive, too muddled inside and too drab to be thought of with much enthusiasm beyond its cadre of business users. The new version, dubbed Grand Sport in hatchback format, is a conspicuously handsome attempt to address all of those faults. It promises to be lighter, leaner and better thought out than the car it replaces. Historically, it'll represent one of General Motors' last half-dozen or so solo rolls of the dice in Europe. Gothically, it'll become one of the most recognizable cars on British roads. We drove a 2.0 Turbo D and Shri VX line nav trim to assess its worthiness for either accolade. Design and styling. Considerable attention has been lavished on the way the new Insignia looks. That's indicative of not only Briton Mark Adams' talent and influence as chief designer but also the emphasis now placed on fostering desirability among buyers. Red, admittedly, is not the car's color, but in other, more subtle shades the 2013 Monza concept-inspired shape, a raked collection of sophisticated angles, is about as eye-catching as a modern mainstream hatchback currently gets. Its proportions are aided by the introduction of a new modular platform, dubbed D2 by General Motors. Its introduction makes an already ample product even larger, with a wheelbase that's 92 mm longer and an overall car length of almost 4.9 meters, even though the overhangs have shrunk. The extra size is about increasing interior space, particularly in the rear, although it has not been achieved without due attention being paid to the scales. A more innovative approach to build materials has resulted in the body in white being 59 kilograms lighter than before. Depending on engine choice, Vauxhall quotes as much as 175 kilograms being shed overall. Even allowing for its predecessor's datedness, that's a credible reduction, especially for a longer, lower, wider car that is still without a 3-cylinder motor. Instead, the lineup is underpinned by a new 1.5-liter 4-cylinder petrol unit in 138 bhp and 163 bhp variants and twinned with a 6-speed manual gearbox. The engine is a mildly brawnier development of the 1.4-liter version found in the Astra, although there's also a 256 bhp 2.0-liter engine, which, alongside an 8-speed automatic gearbox, comes with the added incentive of a GKN-supplied all-wheel drive system based on the firm's torque vectoring twin-stir clutch pack arrangement. On the diesel side, the bulk of the volume will be attributed to the 1.6 Turbo D, available in 109 bhp and 134 bhp outputs, while the range is headed by the 168 bhp 2.0 Turbo D tested here. All come with a 6-speed manual gearbox as standard, with an 8-speed automatic optional on the top line 2.0 Turbo D. Aside from the petrol-powered four-wheel drive model, all versions drive the front wheels on a chassis consisting of front McPherson struts and 4-link rear suspension. The 4x4 gets 5-link adaptive dampers, still dubbed Flex Ride, are a cost option, and fitted to our test car, on all but the range stopper, and Vauxhall has beefed up the available safety systems to include lane keep assist, automatic emergency braking, and rear cross-traffic alert. Interior. Although it has grown in size, the first thing that strikes you about the Insignia is less its spaciousness and more the obvious effort expended on making you feel more at home. The previous model, blighted by unyielding front seats and a general air of ungainliness, was a prospect you sat on top of, barely any more integrated than an umpire at Wimbledon. But in the new version, courtesy of a 30mm drop in the hip point, hugely improved seats and a judicious raising of a more imposing center console, Vauxhall's flagship has become a car much better able to have you sink into it. This low-key but telling upgrade of driving position predisposes you to like, or at least forgive, much of what's going on around it. In the Insignia's case, there's much to objectively appreciate. Any horror show memory of the previous car's button-heavy arrangement of switchgear has been swept aside. The model now wisely partitions its functions at different levels of the dashboard and retains physical buttons for only the sought-after functions. Flanking the latest 8.0 in infotainment screen, you'll find the volume control, home, back and a track, radio skipper, essentially everything you need 90% of the time. This level of sound thinking pervades most of the cabin. Certainly, it appears evident enough in the rear, where, as promised, the Insignia seems less pinched in vital places, the 25mm quoted gain in shoulder and knee room paying particular dividends. There's sufficient space now to make a BMW 3 Series or Audi A4 look measly, if not quite enough to overthrow the extravagantly generous Skoda Superb. The previous Insignia's boot space is not improved upon, but, at 490 liters with the seats up, it remains a voluminous prospect and not far short of the Mondio's. Fit and finish are roughly at eye level with the Ford, too, making it less sophisticated in perceived quality than the Passat and a squadron of compact execs, but not so distant from them as to bemoan the comparative cost saving. Our test car sported the abbreviated NAV suffix at the end of its lengthy model designation, which meant that it came equipped with the full Navi 900 Intelink infotainment system and its associated 8.0 and central touchscreen display. Do without it and you'll get a slightly inferior 7.0 in screen. By and large, the interface and software are fine. It's not the slickest or prettiest setup we've seen, and we still query the amount of spidery black font that's being presented on a white background, but navigating around it isn't fraught with difficulty. The actual navigation is also entirely functional, if a little short on graphical niceties, but given the car's high level of standard internet connectivity, we would question the need to pay the premium. Speaking of which, Vauxhall's OnStar 4G hotspot capabilities, while now not alone in the market, remain a highly attractive feature for family buyers, or indeed anyone with a pressing need to hook up their laptop to the web at inopportune moments. Performance. The 2.0-liter diesel engine, launched a couple of years ago under Vauxhall's optimistic Whisper branding, is a known quantity. With 295 pounds-foot between 1,750 revolutions per minute and 2,500 revolutions per minute, it delivers a credible amount of shove through the mid-range, enough, one would think, to easily distinguish it from the 60 pounds-foot less put out by the 1.6-liter diesel. Unlike that engine, the bigger unit features a two-stage turbocharger rather than variable geometry, and its response is generally very decent. Somewhat less convincing is the level of refinement. Despite its protestations, Vauxhall's common rail 2.0-liter diesel has never been particularly hushed, and its alleged but distinctive rumble carries over. Much of the familiar resonance is segregated by low crank speeds, making its most productive phases and cruising speed volume mostly acceptable. Stray beyond the margins, though, and you'll find a strained, old-fashioned clatter that Vauxhall's premium end rivals have started to damp out. The same manufacturers have also become better at making the performance of their four-cylinder engine seem less noticeably tapered. The Insignia revs to 5,000 revolutions per minute, but there's a dwindling of productivity from 3,750 revolutions per minute onwards. That's forgivable in a smaller diesel motor but less so in a unit that's intended to compete with the increasingly punchy, freer spinning oil burners that all develop beyond 150 bhp. Even with a burly diesel engine over the nose, the Insignia's weight loss is palpable, though less in the margins that make up its mildly enhanced 0 to 60 miles per hour time, a few tenths of a second, according to our 8.7 seconds measure, and more in the slightly liberated way it gets underway for such a large car. It's a subtle gain perhaps, yet, like the driving position, it permeates the experience from behind the wheel with a wider sense of amenability. In a car intended to function as a mobile workspace, that upshot repeatedly pays dividends. Ride and handling. Naturally, as with the Astra, the curb weight advantage is of significant benefit to the car's dynamics. In the smaller hatch, Vauxhall used the reduction in mass to make a much more engaging and agile car than before. In the larger Insignia, the payoff is inevitably smaller, but much that the model now does better has its roots in the virtue of weight loss. Most of this is manifested in the way the car feels a mite more limber than its stolid predecessor and therefore easier to navigate at low speeds. But it is present, too, in a moderately heightened sense of composure, where the longer wheelbase has not overly stifled the modest deftness in the car's very orthodox front-drive handling. Entertaining or incisive it most certainly isn't, yet with thickly accurate steering and no shortfall of directional stability, the Insignia is a broadly easy car in which to push on. Its real strength, though, made plain enough by the long-legged way in which the model is strung, is an affable ability to hoover up monotonous motorway miles. The benchmark here is the Mondio's muffled isolation of its occupants, and although Vauxhall's flagship doesn't quite replicate the same degree of benevolent wheel control, it summons up something of the same impassive attitude when it comes to dealing with long-wave intrusions. Away from the comparative smoothness of 3 lanes, the Insignia doesn't always settle so consistently. It has a habit, on 18-in wheels, of occasionally bristling at minor surface infractions, even with the flex ride set to its floaty touring mode. But it doesn't significantly detract from the benign way the Insignia goes about its business, which, as ever, revolves around turning mind-numbing journeys into a tolerable part of the working day. The Insignia's outright size and bias towards comfort both make their presence felt when you drive the car to the limit of grip. The handling precision, body control and cornering balance are all creditable, and although none is convincing enough to make the car feel like much of a sporting option, the Insignia remains stable, controllable and secure with its electronic stability and traction controls disabled. Body roll gathers progressively with your cornering commitment, to the point where the front wheels begin to scrabble for grip and gently push on through tighter turns. Other family saloons grip harder, remain more composed for longer, feel lighter and involve more. The stability control begins to feel a bit rudimentary with lots of speed and lateral load in the mix, but it works well enough. MPG and running costs. The Insignia has always been sold in a slightly baffling array of trim levels, and the new model is no different. For the record, there's Design, Design Nav, Shri, Shri Nav, Shri VX Line Nav, Tech Line Nav, and Elite Nav. Each level comes with its own peculiarities, although, roughly speaking, Design is the £17,000 entry-level car, Shri the mid-spec competitor, Techline the business user special and Elite Nav the range topper, which costs just under £28,000 for the 4x4 petrol model. The presence of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone integration alongside Bluetooth, Vauxhall OnStar, a DAB radio, 17-in wheels, keyless entry, aircon, cruise control and a 7.0-in touchscreen makes the design trim look like remarkable value for money. For a sub-pound 18K car, you'd need to have the 163 bhp 1.5 turbo model, but you couldn't have a Mondeo, Passat or Superb for that price in any spec. Granted, by the time you get to middleweight grades, ShriNav or Techline Nav being arguably the sweet spot, and added the 134 bhp 1.6 Turbo D for £21,580, you'll be closer to Ford's and Skoda's equivalent values, but expect Vauxhall's aggressive pricing to still admirably undercut its closest rivals. That's a useful incentive, because the Insignia's fuel efficiency is competitive rather than class-leading. As far as CO2 emissions go, the range pick is the 108 bhp 1.6 Turbo D at 105 grams/km, which is commendable but still behind the 94 grams/km of the Mondeo's 118 bhp 1.5 C. Our more powerful test car emitted 136 grams/km, also decent, yet distant from the 108 grams/km of the 148 bhp 2.0 TDI found in a Superb. Furthermore, its quoted 68.9 miles per gallon is obviously superior to our Insignia's 54.3 miles per gallon, a figure we only approached at touring speed. Overall, the car returned 39.2 miles per gallon. Verdict: good. Confident new appearance. Spacious, well-resolved interior. Amenable drive. Bad. Refinement is a work in progress. More stimulating rivals. Complex lineup. The job of making the Insignia not just better but also more relevant in a market slowly falling out of love with non-premium flagships like this was considerable. For the most part, with the stakes impossibly high, Vauxhall can consider its job well executed. No one, not buyer nor dealer nor tire kicker, could move from old to new and fail to commend the differences. In places, it feels like the manufacturer has gone all out. The model could hardly be larger, prettier or priced more affordably. Those virtues alone, on top of a huge customer base, ought to ensure continued big volume success. Conquest sales might be trickier, though. For all its enhancements, the Insignia hasn't fallen far from the tree. There are better and more economical cars to drive, just as there are nicer, finer feeling ones to sit in. Thus, the blurry line between genuinely appealing and simply proficient at its job is still not one the Insignia motors confidently across. Be that as it may, PSA will be delighted to find its subsidiary's new flagship in comparatively fine fettle. In this guise we rank the Insignia Grand Sport third behind the formidable Ford Mondeo and Volkswagen Passat, but impressively ahead of the Skoda Superb and recently facelifted Mazda 6.